Organizations are so regimented. Like you've got that annual planning cycle. And if you're not in it, you're waiting a whole year. Whereas if you can show rapid value mid-cycle, things can shift, right? Suddenly priorities can be moved, money can be moved, projects can be perhaps deprioritized to make room for it.
Ideas, by definition, are always fragile.
No tolerance for failure, no innovation.
The best ideas have to win.
This is the Synthesize Pod from Brightidea. It's your weekly hit of insights and actionable strategies for innovation-minded professionals that just want to get shit done. Welcome to Season 1, Just Say Hackathon.
All right. We are back again with another episode of the Synthesize Pod. How you doing, Margaret?
I'm doing great. It's cool weather in the Boston area right now, so I'm living it up. Got a sweater on, hanging out.
Well, today we have two more of my favorite people, friends, and more friends. We have Veronika and Matt from Brightidea. You guys want to say hello?
Hello. Greetings, everybody. So happy to be here.
Hey.
Greetings, Earthlings, how we normally do our internal calls. Veronika and Matt work in the professional services team at Brightidea, and I asked them to come on to give a slightly different perspective on hackathons. We're continuing with our Season 1, Just Say Hackathon. And Veronika tends to, I'll let her do the long-winded version, but she tends to work with our large customers as a strategic innovation consultant and has done a lot of large-scale hackathons, company-wide hackathons, and just brings a lot of kind of insight and experience to that process, kind of helps people in real time. Hey, watch out for this. Make sure you do this. And then Matt is in a slightly different capacity. Matt works on our methodology. So when we decided to write down all the good things that people like Veronika know and try and make sure that we never miss a beat, Matt came in and started helping us document that. So did I do that okay? Did I do you guys justice?
I think you did.
That's pretty good.
One of the things we've been doing with everyone that comes on the pod is we've been kind of getting into a little bit of the backstory. So maybe we can start with Veronika and just go through a little bit of how you got into the whole innovation world and why it's kind of captivated you or why you've made that your life's work so far. So can you give us some backstory?
Yeah, happy to. I think some of it is just inherently my personality to challenge the way things have always been done. The way we've always done it is not a great answer for me. You can ask my parents. I was probably a handful as a child with that attitude. But I spent a number of years, 11 plus to be exact, at one of the major Fortune 500 financial services firms. So a lot of red tape. A lot of, it's trying to steer the Titanic when trying to, implement change or influence change. And I kind of that petulant child, why not attitude really landed me in a role where we were able to work with some of our ultra high net worth clients and really help service the unique needs they had. And that's actually where I first was introduced to Brightidea. So kind of my fun fact is that I come from the client side and in working on the platform and leveraging it internally, that then spearheaded the career path I had at the organization, which was getting tapped on the shoulder for roles that either didn't exist or were, kind of in their infancy and hadn't fully been framed, or teams that were being stood up. And by working with Brightidea, really had an opportunity to then meet the innovation team that was being founded and spent the rest of my time either standing up the innovation program, helping grow it, or then working on large scale transformation projects in some of our, for lack of better words, unsexiest nooks and crannies of the organization. And for me, that kind of the unsexy part is really where I thrive and where I dive in. The policy changes, process changes. Don't get me wrong, hackathons are great, but even in the splash of a hackathon, where I tend to really focus my energy and my efforts is in that unsexy corner, the places that people don't want to touch and don't want to dig into. Because frankly, if we build something really great on a crumbling foundation, it's just not going to last. And so like I said, it's probably part of just my core fiber of being. I don't necessarily love to do it just because it's been done before. I like to try to make it better, or at least get into the habit of asking the critical question of why do we do it this way? And does it still make sense? And a lot of times it does, and that's okay. At least we've got that gut check in our muscle memory. So yeah, right during the start of the COVID pandemic, made a shift and went from the client side to the Brightidea side, and have been kind of on the other end of the table helping clients just like myself for the last 4 years, and really enjoying that. Come to the table with a lot of lessons learned, a lot of humility and kind of humble beginnings, as I tell folks. So a lot of what we talk about and a lot of the best practices shared are not just, kind of Brightidea lore. It's lived for me, and they are things that I wish I had known, 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago.
So before we go, and we obviously don't need, even though you guys are Brightidea and I'm Brightidea, we don't need to talk about Brightidea. But I'm curious, what were those roles before you kind of shifted over? So you were at Schwab before that, and then you shifted over?
Yeah. So in my time, in my 11 years there, I think I had 8 or 9 roles. I started on the front lines, so working with clients every single day. So very much had a feeling for the pain points that existed, both external, right? Market-driven pain points, especially in a subject area where, gosh, that hurts people. It's one of those taboo topics that we don't talk about enough. So really had great compassion, great empathy for what, money is a catalyst for people. This isn't just, well, the market fell 1,000 points like it did recently, right? It's, does that suddenly put people behind schedule on college planning or retirement planning? There are real life implications to that. So really grateful for that start. That transitioned into a QA coaching role.
And sorry, was that like a financial advisor role that you're in, or what?
It was a registered broker role. So
Okay.
we were, handling kind of the client interactions, more so with clients who didn't have that main point of contact, actually.
Okay.
And so then that transitioned into a coaching role. I know that's a shocker that I like to coach and help people and bring people along and share best practices. So spent a little bit of time doing that. And then that naturally led, again, a lot of tapping on the shoulder. And there was an opportunity to step in for a medical leave situation. And so I took a leadership role, and I never left it. And then those leadership roles lasted me all through grad school. And once I completed grad school, I really wanted to go into something a bit more strategic. So I ended up working with our client experience team, really focusing again on kind of that ultra high net worth segment. So a total flip from where I started my career. And then that was the catalyst for the innovation team. And then I landed at the very tail end of my career in a transformation role for the risk and compliance organization. So again, the unsexy stuff.
And the leadership role in the middle there, that was leading more people that were doing that kind of the brokerage type stuff? It was basically leading the role you had been in?
I led both. I led the brokerage roles, and then also had an opportunity to lead our coaching organization. So I was doing a lot of, not only coaching of my team and, helping them empower employees, but doing a lot of coaching of managers and other leaders as well.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay, great. Well, let's jump over to Matt and get his backstory on the table, and then we can get into some juicy bits. Matt, how did you find your way to this career in innovation?
The short version is it was not a straight path. The common thread for me seems to be the intersection of kind of humanity and technology. When I was an undergrad, I actually started off as a broadcast and film major, but because of some of the classes that I took, I became more interested in the power of communication and language to organize. And through that, I also, ironically, I had a literature class at the University of Iowa. We were studying the Chicago World's Fair, Columbian Exposition of 1893. And we were examining how new technology was described and how people would talk about the implications of that. And I had a project. Now, this is right before the World Wide Web as we know it. And so we were working with early HTML to build our own we couldn't turn in papers. We had something called Psychos cartridges that we would have interactive presentations, but mine examined what it was like to be at the World's Fair, how new technology was being described. An offshoot of that was I started finding out things that were going on at the University of Minnesota with Gopher, things that were going on at the University of Illinois with Mosaic, right, which would then become Netscape. And that sent me down a path of early web-based and interactive technology. And most of my career, it's been split kind of half my time has been on the consulting side and half leading UX and design teams within organizations that then actually became innovation. One of the things through parts of my career was leading teams where we didn't have an official name for our discipline. There were just like kind of tough problems that we were put, can you help us understand this? Can we figure out ways through this? And some of that was with early days of online education. What does it really mean to start to bring universities online and deliver education that way? Which led to work at ACT, which an assessment company in the education space. And there I built the first UX teams and was partnering with our innovation teams. And similar to Veronika, that was my first exposure to Brightidea as well. So we were a customer starting to see the power, when you really start to have a discipline around innovation. So I've been fascinated with both the front end of innovation, the creativity, the different ways of thinking, how we might frame things, how we might enable more people to have their voice heard, and then the rigor and discipline of the back end. How do we see these things through? Because it's not enough just to have the ideas, right? It's what we can do with them. And so that has been a large part of my career. And then with Brightidea, being able to help many organizations on this path, and then that immediately, and then like stepping back with the methodology is, what do these patterns look like? And then how can we capture those and share those so that we can help our customers? And so that kind of brings us here.
The thing that I love to hear, especially it's similar to the other guests we've had on so far, is just this like circuitous route of finding yourself in innovation. And it's like, people get tapped, people find this kind of like odd, role and take a chance on it, but it never feels like it's a very linear, like, this is how I got here. It's always, these career loops are pretty funny to see how it's just kind of like I stumbled myself into it because it was the way that my brain liked to work.
There were no like master's degrees, to go, I want to study innovation management or something at the time. It was like, you just had to have this inkling. It's kind of an outgrowth of like some of the quality management stuff that happened, but that you couldn't go get a degree. I remember sitting in our office when I heard about the first degree and the first ISO standard for innovation and stuff like that. I was like, wow, this is serious now.
Just going to add that, and if you backed up like for career planning, like in high school or college, there was nothing that outlined, here's what innovation management looks like, or here's what innovation strategy looks like, and here's a career path. So yeah, Margaret, very much it's like we're kind of circuitous and here are things I like from this, or you seem like you could help with that, so you drift over here, and then now we see it more coalescing around these disciplines. But yeah, it's not a straight line.
I also like the topic of the World's Fair because innovation, as you point out, is not just about coming up with something new, but it's about getting it out there. And a key piece of that is the communications piece. And it's funny to think that the best way, when you invent something like the light bulb, the best way to tell people about it in that day and age was to like have a fair and have people come in from all over the world and see the new stuff. And like it.
Hey, field marketing still works. Don't knock field marketing.
For sure. Okay, so as we talked about, and as you guys are well aware, we've been working on hackathons, and our whole first season has been, the theme is Just Say Hackathon. Of course, what we mean by that is like, the world's crazy, everything's hectic, what should we do? Just say hackathon. Let's just go do a hackathon and let people, play with some of these new technologies and adapt to some of these new realities. So I'm curious from both of your vantage points, why do you think hackathons are important in this moment? Why do you think, customers are gravitating towards them? I'm always frankly a little surprised when people come to us and say, we've been doing this for 15 years. I'm like, wow, 15 years, that's like a long time. So what do you guys see as the kind of the motivations and the kind of the driving factors?
I mean, for me, what I've been seeing with the clients I've worked with and even the prospects I've had an opportunity to chat with is, in a post-COVID world, there is a craving for connection and there's a craving for a break. And for folks to really step away from the day-to-day work that they do, the grind, and be able to flex muscles in a different way. A lot of organizations are also looking at hackathons as a way of recognizing the hard work without saying, go take a vacation day, here's some extra time off. But it's, here's some time to do something outside of the ordinary, but it still benefits your career path, your skill set, your connection to others. It deepens the connection and and kind of the commitment to the organization that you're at the moment, but also the organization benefits because it gets these amazing grassroots ideas that folks have probably been noodling on. And given that spark, given that gift of time, they actually have the opportunity to follow that and also maybe follow some passions, right? We are not, often most of us are not entirely what our job description is. We bring a lot more to the table, and we sometimes get pigeonholed into areas based on what's needed, based on, the role that we're in, but it lets us tap into some of those skills that we don't normally get to bring to the table, or our extracurricular, folks that have photography skills or, video editing skills. Suddenly that becomes incredibly relevant when you're trying to showcase a net new idea and contribute to a hackathon. So a lot of those kind of creative skill sets, have an opportunity to make an appearance where they don't otherwise in your day-to-day job.
I think that's really well said. Matt, anything you want to add to that? It's a pretty complete answer.
Yeah, that's great. Just building a little bit on what Veronika said too, is I do believe, I hesitate to say post-pandemic, but maybe post-COVID, we're still living with it. But what that did to organizations combined with the frequency or rate of major changes that we're seeing. So we still see, basically digital transformation has been on a corporate agenda for quite some time. But what does that really mean? And so then we see here are almost inexpensive, low-risk ways to really start to play with new technology, to start to understand the implications. A lot of business value from how we can collaborate quickly, how we can de-risk, explore. And then on the people side, right, because for me, it's always about people and technology. On the people side, many of the things that Veronika said, but as we've started to go to work from home or work from anywhere, sometimes not even getting the human connection, the face-to-face. So when we see companies, here's an opportunity to bring people together, that seems to be a big boost and a way to look up from the day-to-day to just say, hey, we know there's a lot going on, but let's start to get a little bit of energy around new things that we might explore. And I think it kind of helps snap people out of maybe the doldrums or a routine, because we know when you sink into a routine, you start to lose the ability to have more creative thinking. And so I think these are ways that they can really just put a jolt into part of the organization in a positive way.
The thing that I'm picking up on too is this, the day-to-day can feel like you're plodding along and not really making any progress. And it feels like hackathons is a moment to go from hard work to success, like finishing something. I mean, knowing that if, it wins or it goes into implementation or, the pathway is a little bit longer, but it feels like this micro moment of satisfaction from completion might be a hidden benefit as well.
I think you're right on with that. Right? It's sometimes we don't have the ability to really demonstrate, hey, here's what we've produced, or here's something new, especially as we move into more of a digital world where there's less physical things produced. It's harder to say, hey, here's something I've done, here's something I contributed to. And in a short time frame, you can kind of have that feeling of success about actually building something.
And so many of us are working on, longer term projects, right? And the reality is sometimes you don't see a finish. In the roles that I had in my past world, oftentimes I got to start things and I got to, set the stage, but I rarely have seen things finished. There is great satisfaction. I think you hit the nail on the head. We like to put a bow on it at the end of the day, and that gives us an opportunity.
Yeah, I like how clarifying the urgency is, right? You're kind of considering all these options. We could do it for this customer or whatever, and then it's we got to do something. Like just pick one and go, because the clock's ticking. I also love that there's this kind of quiet moment where someone can just stop, as Veronika pointed out, and just be like, what would be cool? What would be better? And it's of course you have brainstorming meetings and all that, but I just love the idea of somebody being like, oh, the hackathon's coming up. I want to do something this year. And what should I do? What area should it be in? And it's kind of, might be with a couple coworkers or something, but that quiet moment of thinking about how things could be better and thinking about, where the company's going and how they can kind of, nudge that forward, I think it is really, really cool.
One of the values that we're seeing too with hackathons is, again, there's something produced at the end. And so there's almost a design thinking principle of show, don't tell. You're not talking about what something could be. You actually have things that people can react to, and And it's almost a cascading effect on how that can inspire other thinking, right? Oh, if it can do that, or, oh, we see that that is possible. And if we could do that in 24 hours, what might we be able to do to extend this? So I think that's another part of that excitement, and kind of goes back to what Margaret said too, is you have something to show. And I think, that it's kind of like a picture's worth 1,000 words. It just conveys so much in such a short period of time to help people think about the future.
How many words is a prototype worth?
Three-dimensional.
The other thing I would add to that is not only, what can we spin up in 24 hours, but what are we spinning up without funding? What can we do just with the human brain power and the tools at our fingertips? So imagine if we invested 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 beyond, right? What could this become? But it's a really great way to make that business case in a short amount of time and really rally the efforts around that funding request, especially if you're in a situation where it's off cycle, because that is oftentimes can be a showstopper for folks. Organizations are so regimented, like you've got that annual planning cycle. And if you're not in it, you're waiting a whole year. Whereas if you can show rapid value mid-cycle, things can shift, right? Suddenly priorities can be moved, money can be moved, projects can be perhaps deprioritized to make room for it. But without that kind of proof point, no one's going to buy into it. No one's going to trade off one project for another.
Yeah, there's always a kind of side slush fund for something that's showing results.
There's always more budget.
Actually brought me to a good segue to another one of my questions, which is, I know one of the things that's come up is kind of how is this different from, say, how's a hackathon different from a pitch competition? Or, I know some people are using this phrase ideathon, and I know we're just talking about, Matt was talking about the prototype a minute ago. So any insights on that, or even just kind of, talking about how, what possible differences might be?
The differences that stand out, not only from ideathon and pitch, but also just from the traditional, innovation initiative engagement that we tend to see, is that real kind of sense of urgency that you mentioned, Matt, but containing it in a really specific window of opportunity. And that window of opportunity might be broken into phases, and it culminates with that event, but everything has a purpose and intention, and you can help people, kind of rally into and stay focused on, the ask at hand. And so even though it may be drawn out, right, it may be that we have a window for submission, then we're incubating our ideas, we might have an evaluation structure, and then the final event. Everything has a purpose, and there's a sense of urgency with each of them. So regardless of what role you play, whether you're planning and building the hackathon, whether you're participating, whether you're supporting it from, an executive sponsorship standpoint or an evaluator standpoint, everybody plays a role, and they kind of have to sprint in that moment. So that the master timeline might look lengthy, but it's built up of a number of sprints, which keeps you on your toes, and it keeps injecting that energy at each turn, because you never settle into kind of that drawn out, well, we're building a business case and we have 3 months to build it and then we present it. There's different activities that keep happening. So that's the big difference that I've noticed with my clients, and just even in the planning cycle and how people start to wrap their arms around all the different activities that go into it. There is that sense of energy and of purpose, and also there's also many little doors that close along the way. So to your point, Margaret, of sense of accomplishment, even for those of us on the planning side, we know that we're checking things off the list as we go, and as we're kind of aiming for that and getting close to that final event and culminating with that splash.
I'd say one of the things is it's really interesting, because I think there's, in general, some of the terms are almost synonymous, because somebody wants to have an event for some of the benefits and value that we've spoken to. But I do see, like, one big difference in my mind between maybe a pitch versus hackathon is the pitch is focused on presenting a final idea or solution to get funding, but it's not necessarily proof of concept, right? It's more like, here is a business model around something, and it's a different way of thinking about a problem and a solution, where I feel, for me, hackathon is more prototype, that you are building something. And almost just going back to a little bit of design thinking, is sometimes you think to build beforehand, and other times you build to think. Like, are we thinking about this the right way? And a lot of what a hackathon will reveal is new ways to think about something. And then the squishy gray, right, with the ideathon, is it has some components of each. But one of the things that I've seen a little bit more recently is sometimes there's concern, is a hackathon only for coders, right? Does it feel too exclusive? And so sometimes we've seen some customers that might not use that word hackathon, but that's what they're running. And I've seen ideathon used in some of the not-for-profit space or for ecosystem development where you're bringing different stakeholders from different organizations to collaborate together. So there might be a big hairy problem, a wicked problem. How might we think about it and getting people from different perspectives? But I think ideathons are probably less prescriptive about what is it that we're actually producing at the end and what might happen, where I feel like there's a lot of shared components between like a hack, a pitch, and an ideathon. But I think sometimes that's the early interest I have with our customers too, is talking through what are their goals, what do they want to accomplish, because sometimes they might have a word, and we don't want to get too specific, like too righteous about one definition or the other. It's about what are you trying to accomplish, and then what's the best way to get there.
I know that terminology is kind of still a little blurry in the market, and it, for any one company, it doesn't matter what they call it, right? But as we try and like design methodologies, and Veronica's talking about all the discrete phases and the planning and the deliverables, it becomes a little bit bigger of a greater importance to kind of clarify those distinctions. But I know there's still we're still trying to tease out exactly how we bucket all those things. I wanted to talk a little bit about permissioned or permissionless innovation. So can you guys pick up that thread and kind of where Hackathon fits in, and maybe even how that relates to some of the other things we were talking about with pitch, et cetera?
First, I'll just touch upon the abstract and then get to the specific. But right at the abstract, some of the things in innovation is what might get in the way of innovation is fear. We hear that quite often, and there's also might be fear at an individual level. Do I have permission to do this? Can I step outside of my day-to-day job because here's something that I think is interesting? And so what I think a hackathon does for multiple layers in the organization, it allows permission to explore this space. Like, we're giving you a pass to work on this. We aren't working on the day-to-day. And I think that is almost, it's a weight that I think comes off of a lot of people when they're like, okay, I can do this. This is basically a safe space to explore, right? And you can be authentic while you're doing that a little bit more. So I think, for maybe lack of better terms, it's permission to let your hair down and explore something that might not feel like your day-to-day. And I know, because that can be hard, especially in operational roles, where in an organization, it's about throughput, it's about the day-to-day. And if you're seen as doing something other than that could get somebody in trouble, or you might have a perception that I could get in trouble if I'm doing that. So I think basically the hall pass, or the permission slip that you get during a hackathon, that can inject a lot of positive energy into the organization and allow individuals to feel, hey, here's a chance to show off some other things. Like Veronika said, that sometimes in organizations you might be seen as person X with skill set Y, not knowing that you have other things that you can bring to the table. And so while they have that freedom, they can demonstrate some other skills.
At our hackathon, we have someone in our finance team, and he worked on a crypto project where we didn't have a lot of crypto projects in the company, and no one told him not to, right? It's just he wanted to do that, and it turned out he had worked at a team at Deloitte on crypto, so he had that knowledge, and so he was able to set all that up. But that might not be apparent to everyone else at the company.
I'd say permission to be permissionless. So you need the permission up front, as Matt was saying. I mean, that's incredibly important. There's a drastic difference in engagement and participation rates when you don't have that air coverage from senior leadership that says, this is important. We want this. We are carving out the time for you. We want and need you to participate, versus just, hey, we're having a hackathon, and that's where the messaging stops. So the permission piece is incredibly important. We're going to touch a lot on, communication and messaging in this, I'm sure. That is key. And then once you have that permission, then as Matt said, let your hair down. At that point, some guardrails are helpful to get people maybe a bit more organized or thinking, right? Because if you just say, work on the best idea, there might be a deer in the headlights look. There might be a bit of, feeling overwhelmed, not sure if we should go right, left, up, or down. So guardrails are helpful, but at that point, that's where the permissionless takes over. And that's really, especially in the kind of in the incubation process and the build process, that's where I think we sort of diverge and converge. That's where we see, I think, the least amount of rigor in a hackathon. And then as we bring it back into perhaps, how we're demoing, the final deliverable, the prototype, whatever it may be, maybe how we're doing, presentations. Is it science fair style? Is it stand up on a stage? More of a formal pitch, as if you were, pitching to investors, where there's that overlap with like a Shark Tank style event. That's where you start to see, again, a bit more prescriptive nature, whether it's time constraints or, a particular style of delivery. So really that middle section, that meaty middle, that where most people get their engagement and get refueled, that's where the permissionless takes over.
I think that idea of it like converging at different points is really interesting, because I've always just thought about creativity coming from constraints, right? The more constrained you are, you actually know which variables you're allowed to play with, and then it gives you actually a pathway to do it. But I love that idea of like converging at those points, because I think in art too, it's like the editing process is a piece of art, right? Or a piece of creativity. And so thank you. I feel like that helps me even think about it, where it's like you can add in these constraint marks, but you're not constraining yourself through the entire thing.
Yeah, even through the different phases, right? You might have a couple different ideas of projects you might want to work on, and then you have to pick one, and that just gets you out of the incubate phase, and then you start building, and then the build has its own constraints to get something done in a certain amount of time. Okay, so let's go to the big hairy elephant in the room, which is planning. So where should we start there? How much time does it take to set these things up? What do you talk about? What do people need to know about up front? Let's talk about some of those aspects.
Planning's a necessity. I mean, it is in everything, right? Whether you're planning a trip, whether you're planning to send your kids back to school, any kind of big event, big milestone that takes time and resources and money, we have a tendency to plan for. And I think a hackathon is no different in that sense. I think what people underestimate is the sheer amount of planning that goes into motion for things that will come much further down the road. We have to start talking about it early, because of all the connective tissue that, and the dependencies, that we just can't come back to that down the road and treat it as a singular standalone silo. That's not an option. And so that planning phase, when we look at the workload and we think about, the hours that go into, putting a hackathon in motion, that planning phase can feel really overwhelming. What people, I think, don't understand is we're not finishing a lot of what gets set in motion in that planning phase. Some of it, can take a couple of months. Some of it can, might not be done till event day or even the postmortem, but we are putting the wheels in motion for that. And the planning phase, to me, is a great opportunity to get alignment with not only our team, but the teams that we're working with. It's, kind of divvying up the roles and responsibilities and making sure that transparency and that, kind of that division of labor is clear up front, even considering things like who's going to be on vacation, who might be stepping out for a week or two. I had that happen on a hackathon recently where we were spinning it up pretty quickly. I think we were, from the time we started working together to launch, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 weeks. And we were a week and a half in, and 2 of my 4 points of contact were stepping out for vacation. 1 for a week and a half, 1 for 2 weeks. And so that just meant, right, division of labor. Luckily, they were a client that had done hackathons numerous times before. So while it was a bit of a rinse and repeat, right, there was still a huge opportunity to modernize their process, bringing it onto Brightidea, features and functionality that they, didn't use before or had never had an opportunity to implement. And so that was incredibly important, is to make sure that we have the right players at the right time. At the end of the day, it is a big adult board game. And it is making sure we have all the right pieces. We know where our, finish line is. We know where not to pass go, not to collect $200. We know what can land us in jail. We really just map out the path forward, the gotchas, the places where it might not sound like we need to start on that today, but we really do. And I'm going to give you 5 examples why. Risk and compliance being one of them. Most companies have that as a huge hurdle. And getting those folks on our side as early as possible is incredibly important. But if we don't put that concerted effort into the planning phase, we're going to miss some of these key pieces. And then we're going to have the 11th hour fire drills, not just once, but probably at each of those different, diverge and converge kind of phase moments. And everybody's going to be more stressed, and that then takes the enjoyment out of it. So this isn't just that we get to flex different muscles for the participants. For a lot of folks that are planning a hackathon, this isn't their day job. And so that's another key constituent that I keep in mind is how do we make it fun for them? How do they get to flex different muscles and maybe step into a space or be exposed to an innovation space that they don't normally work in? So I take our stress level very seriously. None of us want to be working nights and weekends. And so the more we can lay out up front, the better off we're going to be. So all that to say, the really unsexy act of planning ends up being the biggest powerful, workhorse in the process of a hackathon. It's not event day, it's the planning process.
And I imagine working with someone like you at least gives the roadmap of the known unknowns rather than somebody, like you said, not doing this as their day job, maybe spinning this up for the first time, reading a lot of material about it, and fundamentally falling into those traps that you have well documented over risk and compliance, first call, right? But I imagine that there's a lot of folks that don't even think about that until, to your point, it's way too late.
I think when people think about a hackathon, they probably are thinking about the event itself. Right? What does this 24-hour, 40-hour period look like? But you had mentioned even like editing and art and creativity. As basically people that are designing the hackathon, we don't want people to come out of flow in the hackathon, and part of that is having a well-designed process to get there. And in the theme of unsexy things that Veronika had talked about, some of it is like even early on, not only who's out of the but who might the judges be? Who might the sponsors be? And then are they available all at the same time so that we can have judging? Is it going to be in a physical space? Is that space reserved? Where sometimes there's been curveballs where somebody was expecting to have it in a nice facility space in their organization. And lo and behold, there was another project going on where there was actually demolition and remodeling going on. And so it's like even finding out, are we going to have the space? Who can be there? And so some of the basic blocking and tackling that you just want to get done early, and then some longer runway on maybe legal and compliance, right? Like, intellectual property discussions. Are we bringing in external people to the hackathon who they might not be paid employees? And so what does that mean? What are the implications? So there are some of those things to get laid out early, and then having alignment on even things like incentives and what are some of the harder structures that might force us, like how much time will we have to present and judge. And that's a lot of what you're doing with the planning. And then there's a communication thread throughout. But I think, at the high level, sometimes it's like thinking about what you have to do to get ready for the event, hosting kind of this smooth event, and then what might you do after. So that's where I think sometimes on planning, it's not necessarily top of mind for folks, but from Veronika's perspective too, here's where I've seen these things succeed, and here's where I've seen some folks struggle. We don't want you to struggle, so here are some things we want you to start working on early.
Maybe we can click into kind of one project, Veronika, and maybe one that's kind of interesting or colorful from a setup perspective or a planning perspective, and you can just kind of walk us through that and just highlight some of the things that came up, good and bad, kind of things that went well, things that kind of caught off guard or whatnot.
Yeah, so thinking back a couple of years ago, one of the first hackathons I worked on, the best gift I could have gotten was multiple work streams and a lot of people that wanted to help and were already helping. That also ended up layering in some additional complexities. But I appreciate that the organization was incredibly organized and was incredibly thoughtful and kind of divvied up the work in terms of, we've got the platform build, right? We know we need content. We know we need to get, kind of the look and feel of the platform right. They had a communications thread, a communications and engagement thread where there was a link to corporate comms. So already had that partnership established. I didn't have to, implore that on them. We had a thread for swag. So, Matt's point of incentives, recognition, what are we doing to make this special? Not that people participate in a hackathon just to get a t-shirt. But those are the nice touches that set an event aside. I think we had a thread for evaluations where we had basically, I'm going to call it a key stakeholder thread. Anything that involved anyone other than, the focus on the front end participants and those of us that were, kind of doing the admin duties on the back end. And so we did daily meetings for each work stream had a meeting once a week. And then on Fridays, we did a collaborative meeting where we did a big share as to what work had been done, any outstanding blockers, very much running it much like an agile kind of work environment. So you could call our weekly meetings stand-ups, and then we had this big weekend, kind of almost like a weekly retrospective. For me, it was really eye-opening to see the level of organization and rigor that a company can bring to something, even if they've never done it before. And they took what was repeatable from other initiatives, right? Whether you're launching a new product or whether you're hosting a volunteer fair, and took as much of that so that they didn't have to recreate the wheel, and then left space for us to do our part and inject, whether it was platform recommendations, whether it was best practices on how to collect the submissions, the ability to onboard judges and evaluators. So that planning process, while incredibly hairy and complex from the standpoint of just how many cooks we had in the kitchen, I think our Friday calls were somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 people because everybody joined, not just the lead for that particular work stream. So transparency was huge. The ability to jump in and help another work stream. There was a lot of cross collaboration happening. Folks sometimes sat on a couple different work streams more permanently. Like I said, while it was big and hairy and messy, we kind of found our rhythm. And looking back on it, I know it was overwhelming in the moment, but looking back on it, I really think they hit the nail on the head in terms of having identified the right people with the right skill sets to chime in on the right components, and had the access to the folks that we needed, sign-offs on. Maybe they didn't need to be on every meeting, but we knew that we needed person X every 2 to 3 weeks to sign off on certain key decisions. And that access was granted. There probably wasn't even, a gateway to that access. It was just, we're here to help, you tell us when you need us. That planning process was just very regimented, right? Like, it was very cadenced, it was very systematic, it was very focused. For all of us. And so I think that helped, that organization to success. They came back for year 2, which was really great. And at that point, that was probably the best part. We came back like, hey, we've done this before. We know who's playing what roles. We kind of kicked up our feet. We're like, yeah, we got this. None of us are stressed. None of us are working weekends. This is great. But it also speaks to the power in numbers. One of the things that I had mentioned to Matt and to our executive sponsor internally when we ran our Brightidea hackathon is, you guys have probably had one of the hardest jobs I've ever seen in running a hackathon because we're a really small organization. So everyone's wearing 6 or 7 hats. If we had committees, like that organization had committees, 2/3 of the company was probably planning the hackathon at that point. And we didn't have that luxury. And so some of these larger organizations where you have a corporate comms team, you have a defined legal and compliance team, you have a corporate events team or a corporate real estate team, you have an approved vendor list. Those are not things to be taken for granted in that planning process. Those are all resources that make your job that much easier. So frankly, the smaller the organization, not saying it can't be done and not saying that they have to be difficult hackathons, they just may not have some of that built-in infrastructure that a large, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company would have. And so that's where the planning process varies. But having the right people identified early on, I can't stress that enough. That has made my hackathons, and that has broken some of us at times and stressed us out beyond belief when we don't have the right people in the right seats, or we don't even know where to find the right people.
And then you have somebody come in and do an executive swoop and poop over the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah. And Veronika, I know some of the larger organizations I've worked with too, it's almost this early on, that linking and leveraging of assets where like the facilities person knows that, or like you said, like even for like t-shirt orders or awards, right? They already have passed and they know exactly how to get you there. And they'll just tell you, hey, what do you need? Right. And then they can go do it. And other times where a lot of energy might be spent if you have to explore that and learn that on your own or bump into some unexpected constraints. So yeah, getting some of those people in early, and they don't have to be there all the time, but they know how things work in the organization, and they know who you can go to in a spirit of helping is that part can be really exciting.
That planning process, right? Like taking inventory of who are the people, right? Who do we have available to us, whether permanently or, in these spurts, taking inventory of, you mentioned the date and the time and availability. There is nothing more important than scanning the corporate calendar. I had a large media company that launched their hackathon in the same week as another big global effort that was happening, and it really hampered participation. I've also had folks that have had, reorgs in the middle of their hackathon where they're pivoting and they've said, okay, well, we didn't know this was coming. We're going to extend by a month and we're going to push our date back. So just having awareness of corporate calendar, vacation calendars, right? A lot of folks we work with have great EU presence. August is not the time to run a hackathon. You're going to miss out on some really great participation. So there's the awareness of the when. There's some consideration as to some of those guardrails early on and upfront of how do we make this palatable for everyone? But also if it's if AI is a huge focus right now for the organization, then let's use AI as a bit of a guardrail and get people excited about it, because then you're helping write the next chapter of what that organization is going to participate in. And then it's just mapping out, again, some of those unsexy logistics, the frequency of meetings, and getting I like to leapfrog a lot. And so I like to have recurring meetings throughout the week, because what you discuss on Tuesday, chances are is not done by Thursday. But we've got, we'll talk about that next Tuesday. So you go talk to legal and compliance. You get the information you need that that is going to inform our next decision. Hey, on Thursday, we're working on this parallel decision, and it's keeping like 15 trains on parallel tracks. Sometimes they intersect, sometimes they don't. But having continuous touch points lets us bounce back and forth and really keep all those trains moving in a really organized fashion. Again, it can look like probably like what my mom thought when she walked into my bedroom at 11 p.m. as I was a teenager and I decided I was going to clean, where everything had to come out before it went back in. It's mass chaos, but it has to get worse in some ways before it gets better. If people looked at our project plans or looked at the meetings and the agenda items, it would probably feel really overwhelming, but there is a method to that madness, and it is organized chaos, but it's also the most efficient use of time and resources.
So a couple more questions on that one project you were talking about. What kind of company was that? How big were they? How big was the hackathon?
60,000+ person organization. We spanned the entire globe. So, Asia, India, all the way out to the Pacific Northwest, Hawaii territories.
And was it localized at like basically for the whole company, or was it in a division of the company?
It was sponsored by a division of the company, but it was open to the entire organization. So all 60,000+ employees had an opportunity to participate. It was a large HR services organization that we worked with. So again, that was probably the first experience I had in something that was called a hackathon that in many ways was, and in some ways wasn't. And the marketing became a little more challenging. Sometimes, a lot of the the FAQs that we kept updating and some of the messaging that was being updated on the homepage and in some of their communication channels that were available to them was about clarifying that a hackathon was indeed, not just limited to coders and to engineers, that everybody was indeed welcome. And so it was my first experience in being really careful and intentional with how we name a hackathon event, because there are preconceived notions. And so I have a lot of organizations, as a result of that experience, a lot of organizations now, even if they're calling it a hackathon, even before we know the topic, even before we know the date, they start with teaser communication, letting folks know this is coming. Here's what it is and here's what it's not. So we're starting to demystify not only innovation, but what is a hackathon? What is it not? You might have heard about this. This isn't just for, the folks that are coding or the folks that work on our website or whatever it may be. So I think that organization ended up having a slightly bigger hurdle with communications, simply because we were having to kind of backpedal a little bit and kind of reset expectations, reset the baseline, and then build from that again based on the questions that they got. So yeah, it was a multi-phased event, all virtual. So there was, we talk a lot about the incubate phase. They did their incubate phase in really incubate phases. So that diverge and converge, there would be some type of a submission. There would be some activity on the part of the participants. There would be some part of some activity on the part of the, evaluators or subject matter experts, and then back to the drawing board. And that cycle repeated about 3 or 4 times before doing final presentations. Those were recorded. There was, a green screen behind all the senior leaders were in a room together because teams were dispersed, right? They presented virtually, kind of much like we're sitting here today. And then they published that recording to the entire organization. So really made sure that even if you chose not to participate, or if you participated but didn't make it to the finals, that there was kind of that continuous thread of sharing the story of innovation and sharing, what people had been working on. So a really, probably an early adopter in many ways, Matt, of the incubate phase, although it looks a little different than we probably execute it today. It worked quite well, especially given some of those constraints that they had, such as the sheer size, 1,000 plus ideas submitted initially, and the sheer number of time zones that we were spanning in this event as well.
How long was that kind of setup and planning? And Matt, if I mess up the names of your phases on the methodology, you can jump in and correct me. But with that organization, were you guys, 3 months to lead time? Was there 1 month lead time? Well, all this activity, how long was it taking place over?
Matt, I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, and you want me to go back 2 years?
Approximately.
Yeah. Roughly, I want to say I started working with them like early spring, and I want to say we launched mid to late April, maybe early May. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 weeks of lead time. Again, I think part of that was informed and I think accelerated by a couple of facts. One, they had done this on a smaller scale before. Again, not on our platform, but they had done it at a smaller scale. So they had some of the initial framing in place and some, of their own kind of best practices and gotchas. And here's what we've done, but here's where we'd like to be. They had a bit of that vision that they were coming to the table with. And they had a number of the people identified coming into the process. So those two things let us move a lot faster than we otherwise would have. So yeah, a couple of months, I would say, safely from start to finish. And then if we look at the totality of, the multiple phases I referred to and the final presentation, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'm guessing 6-ish months, probably 7 if we call a formal retrospective closeout. So that gave plenty of time for, again, the different kind of calls for action, the different, evaluation rounds, the different build out phases. And so including, again, our phases of planning and then close out for the entire project itself. So 6 to 7 months is what I would ballpark.
So I think that's a good segue to jump over to Matt. Veronika's been on the hot seat for a hot second. So Matt, maybe you can talk about the process of building a methodology and, kind of what motivated that and kind of some of the trials and tribulations we've had, and scope creep or whatever you want to call it. I know it's been a journey. So maybe you can get into some of those things.
Yeah. With the methodology itself, I think it was something where maybe early we just identified like, hey, we need to document this a little bit more. What does this look like? And let's just make it kind of clear and easy to understand. It's in the making it clear and easy to understand, I think, is where the detail work was. And what we started to do to explore is we worked with our services team and our product team on what have we seen, what have we experienced outside of Brightidea, within Brightidea, and then we basically created a very large kind of methodology or rubric, kind of swim lanes and phases. And we had a lot of people adding their insights, their gotchas, or here are tips and tricks that we've had. And then we would synthesize that information and bring that together and then coalesce around what's happening and who's doing what. And then another round of really just bringing to, okay, what does a sequence generally look like? Almost to help with wayfinding, right? Like this is the general path. And then here are the topics that we think are incredibly important under each. but again, not trying to make it overwhelming. So it's interesting because there's a lot of deep thought that went into this. Right, but what we want to present is something that's easy to follow so that folks don't get lost on what are the key things that need to happen when to reduce that stress, to organize, to manage expectations. Matt, as you know, it didn't happen nearly as quickly as I think we would have hoped, but I think we're really happy with where it's at. But it did take a lot of design work and revs on it to get it to a place where, yes, this makes sense, and the kind of the right level of fidelity to not overwhelm people, but show enough like, oh, I get it, and I can see the picture. And those are things that I might not have thought of, but each part of our methodology, we can go into deep dives on it, and we have tips, tricks, our experience and resources and tools for those. Just trying to find that right level of fidelity to share that story was an interesting process in organizing information.
I want to ask you to just kind of at a high level go through the phases that you've isolated, but even upstream of that there's variance, right? There's the people running the public hackathon, the internal hackathon, there's the company wide, there's the departmental, there's the single event, there's the company that runs 50 of these things a year, So, I mean, that took a while just to kind of wade through all that complexity. And then we kind of said, okay, let's just focus on one event, maybe it's their first event. And, if we were to do everything we could to, have this be a world-class hackathon, what would we do? So yeah, maybe you can just talk through some of the phases that you and your team have identified and kind of what happens in those phases.
Yeah, happy to. And so at a high level, right, we basically have three big buckets. There is kind of the pre-event, then the event itself, and then post-event. And that goes back to early as sometimes the insight where a lot of people think about the event itself, but what are we really doing on the front end to make a successful event? And then what do we do after the event to continue to derive value from the hackathon? And so those three buckets, and then each of those buckets has three components. So in the kind of that pre-event, we have plan, which we've talked about, setup. Now you're starting to get your platform organized. You're starting to do more about workflows and decision making. And then the last phase that we go through before you get to the event for us is incubate. And incubate is really rooted a lot of in Brightidea's DNA about how do you bring ideas to life? How do you cultivate ideas? And what do we need so that when we get to the event, sometimes we talk about an empty dance floor phenomenon. Nobody wants to be the first on the dance floor, or you don't want a cold start to your event. And so the incubate does a lot of work to prime the pump to get ready for the event. And then you have the event itself. And with that, kind of three buckets there are build, judge, and recognize. Right. And so the building is people are, those are almost like butts and seats hacking when you're thinking about that 24 or 48 hour period or longer. But that's where that work is going on. And so then you dig into how do you facilitate that? Do we have mentors there? From your planning phase, you're making sure that all of the tools and assets that people would need are available to them to work in a safe space. And by safe, too, I mean digitally. Is somebody exploring new AI functionality? Do they have the tools? Do they have a sandbox so they don't take down production if they're working on something new? And then the judging phase, and even a lot of times for judges, this is a new activity for them, and those are leaders. So how do we prepare them so that they don't feel uncomfortable, right? They know here's what it's going to look like. Here's how we're evaluating. Here's what the process will look like. So how do we score? How do we even have presentations run? And then after judging, you'll have recognize, and that's closing out the event. Right? And so there's a lot of importance on communication, right? and celebration, and the awards, and thanking people. A lot of the components that you think about when you go to events that make you feel good for being there and recognizing. We're bringing that so you don't lose the human side of kind of recognition and excitement. And at that point, most people are really fatigued, right? But there's a lot of good work that still needs to be done. And that's what we have kind of our post-event is how do we close out an event? How do we put a bow around what happened? And then we have a review stage. Now let's start to dig in. What happened? We can look at numbers. We're having retrospectives. What do we want to do in the future? Which then goes into our last phase is really transition. And at that transition phase, with the winning ideas, making sure that they have a home. What is the next step for those? And I think one of the and I'm going to steal some of Veronika's language, some of the back to the well elements. So there are ideas that were developed that might not have been a winner based on the categories or criteria that we set for the hackathon, but they really open up eyes to new possibilities. Can we find homes for those ideas? What are the next steps so we don't lose those? And kind of the last activity we have is what's next. It really is being intentional about, is it next step for that hackathon? Matt, as you mentioned, it's when we think about it, it's one of our forcing functions is focus on just one of the variants of a hackathon and then be able to explain that. And so if it's a first time event, a few things, that's what's next. Now they've almost prototype hackathons themselves. Do they want a hackathon program? And then, again, some of those other ideas, because a frustration that I've experienced personally and with customers is sometimes you have these great ideas, but it feels like then they go to a graveyard to die. I had one customer, these were related to pitch events, but he said that's where innovation goes to die. It's all this great work has been done, but they can't find a home. It's like these orphaned ideas, and they just feel that there was a lot of potential that's lost, and that is kind of soul-sucking for a lot of people in the organization, especially those that contributed to these ideas. So what is it that we can do from the ideas that weren't even winners to take those to the next step, to continue to extract value from the hackathon? And that's one of the things I get really excited about is not just the winning ideas. And there's a lot of excitement on how you get there to, and when I talk about winning for the hackathon itself, it's some of the other insights. We even experienced this in one of our recent hackathons, right, is the presentations that were given, and you could see light bulbs going off and follow-up conversations and work that was getting triggered just from somebody being able to present an idea, even though it might not have been the winner for the event. Sorry, I went a little long on that. I hope that was making sense.
We didn't even get into your delivery guide, so we're just scratching the surface.
Something that I think is so interesting, and I jotted this down before when we were talking, is this idea of how much structure we need to be able to support creativity. And as I'm listening, my best guess is that the structure and support helps reduce anxiety and fear in the process, because things can go off without a hitch or as least hitches as possible. But is that the main focus, is that the structure actually allows you to then sink into the creativity? Or are there other benefits of having, because it feels to me like it's such a dichotomy between structure and then the freedom of creativity?
From my perspective, not to sound too much like a consultant, it depends. You're right on, is what we're trying to do is, can we set the right level of guardrails and structure to allow creativity to flourish in those stages, in those phases, so that people aren't overwhelmed by what could this be, what's next. So for me, this goes back to a general principle of mine, is back to wayfinding, is that most user error and frustration in technical systems comes back to wayfinding issues. Where am I and what's next? And so if we can start to lay these out, and also almost a progressive reveal, right? We don't start a hackathon project with, here's everything that needs to be done. It's hey, here's the general path. And so you can see that, and let's start to dig into what's really important now, and just, kind of plant some seeds on, these are things we'll need to work on as we get there. But I think you're right, is then we've set, in some ways, nice boundaries for the spaces to play in those phases and stages, so that we're eliminating some of that cognitive load for folks, so that they can actually then focus on the fun stuff, the juicy bits, knowing that these things will be facilitated, that there will be space for them. They don't have to figure those things out. And that's, I think, part of the artistry of it too, is that people don't even know they're not taken out of flow because they didn't have to think about these things, or they're overwhelmed by the process.
I think there's kind of two tracks. I think for the, event coordinator, absolutely, reducing stress and anxiety and things that could go wrong, looking bad in front of management and all that stuff, or looking bad in front of the whole company. those are very top of mind things. I think on the participant track, it's really that break that Veronika was talking about, and the separation from the day job. And Matt was talking about operational focus. I had one time I was meeting with a team and they were talking about their customer support team, and they were like, it's really hard because they have this screen on the wall that says how many calls they've done per hour and what's the average time per call and resolutions, and then it's like you're telling them to stop. That's such a mindset, that's such a focused operational mindset, and you have to jog them out of that to think about, could we do this better? Could we have an AI chatbot or something? That. It's hard to fit that in between calls, right? When the thing's just queuing up the next call, or everyone has objectives and key results for the quarter that they're trying to hit, and that's all planned, and every ounce of capacity is kind of planned out. I think that whereas for the coordinator, you're trying to relieve anxiety, for the participants, I think you're just trying to, that all that planning goes into creating a structure that just protects them from another call coming in, or another quarterly target that they're worried about missing because they got to close a deal or something like that. So it is interesting. You'd think it was supposed to be true that as we got more and more technology, more and more abundance, we'd have more and more free time and we could all just, but I think it's actually gone quite the opposite, where the planning has been, it's like airplanes, right? Like they fill every seat now. It used to be like there'd be like half full or something like that, but now through software algorithms, they fill every seat. I think people are trying to fill every seat of someone's day, right? And there's just no time. And so a lot of this planning is just throwing elbows against the rest of the organization to block out this time and say, okay, you can take some time to think about projects, or we're going to take these 2 or 3 days to work on those projects, and just kind of create that space, I think, is kind of the essential element. We've talked about the unsexy bits. Let's talk about the sexy bits. What is it about this that is compelling to you? What is this about? What is it about this that is exciting and sexy, and why do you think it's kind of worth your time to work on the methodology, or worth your time to help these customers through all these trials and tribulations? What's kind of the core ethos beneath it all that drives you to do this type of work?
For me, it is how do we enable potential, right? And how do we set the table for innovation to happen? And specifically with hackathons, or as we maybe different flavors of these events, is how do you bring the human potential together? How do you help provide and inject energy into organizations to solve and do really cool things? That's where a lot of my energy comes from, is how do you help companies become more resilient as it feels like there's a pace of change that's overwhelming? Matt, when you were talking about seats on a plane or the call center, early in my career, I was doing process flows for contact centers, right? And it's first call resolution, how much time and how expensive a problem becomes the deeper it goes in an organization. And you're right, that firefighting mentality, that can be hard to step out of. And a side note, my dad was a firefighter and a fire officer, and when you'd break down firefighting, the most expensive, hard part is putting the fire out itself. And then there's the part that is fire prevention and education. Those aren't sexy, right? The fire inspector, that's not a sexy role. There's no movies about the great fire inspector, but you have firefighter saving a child or getting the cat out of a tree. No shows about Joe the fire inspector. Right, but the fires that they prevent, right, the things that they can do for safety, I think sometimes it's we're building some of the tools to enable some of these great things. And so sometimes it's not seen, but I get really excited about how do you help people collaborate at scale? How do you help people explore new spaces and new possibilities? And I think that both the tech side and the people side of this, it's just such a rich area in a time where people, I think, are constantly stressed. Work itself is different and changed a lot in the past few years. The things that organizations have to confront, right? We've talked about this internally at Brightidea. There was a time not that long ago in business, you might live through one major transformation. In a current generation, you've seen from early e-commerce to just mobility, right? Now you're pulling out of a supercomputer in your pocket and you're able to order things on the fly. And then we're seeing cryptocurrency. Right, we're seeing blockchain technology. Then we're seeing social and political changes, that there's a lot that is impacting organizations. And I think that hackathons are a way that you can really start to almost build a muscle to change. I think that's one of the things, if you don't have the muscle or the mindset when you have to change, it's really hard. And here are ways that you can step out and look at things that might impact you, or de-risk your future. That might be on the negative side, like thinking about fear and risk, but like explore new opportunities. Where might this go? And I think all of those things can be found in hackathons, and that's one of the things that gets me really excited.
But Matt, you're saying that you would be a fire inspector.
I think I have a dual personality. I don't want to.
Don't want to pigeonhole yourself.
No, and as a kid, I always was, I liked the tools and the trucks and the sirens and the horns, but even things as simple as learn not to burn or stop, drop, and roll, right? Little tools and tips that you give to people to be safe. Yeah, how do you prevent these things from becoming big, expensive fires is fascinating for me.
What about you, Veronika? I know you've probably avoided a bunch of fires with your customer work, letting them see what's coming. But what gets you excited about this type of work, and why is it worth doing?
So for me, it's really the exposure, right? It's getting folks who might otherwise not have the opportunity to engage in any type of innovation activity, or have been privy to an activity but didn't have the bandwidth, right? When it's an extracurricular add-on to your job, folks may not be able to or choose not to participate. When that space is carved out, you suddenly don't have an excuse to not participate, and you're given that that ability, and it's made important for you. And so the exposure for people who've, again, never participated in an activity like this, or a hackathon, or an innovation challenge, a pitch event, it doesn't matter, what those activities actually are, but the fact that we're exposing people to, that kind of challenger thinking, right? To challenge the way things have been done before. There's so much more buy-in from folks too, to the long end game when you have a seat at the table. It's one thing to invite people. It's another thing to make that table hospitable. And hackathons afford that opportunity. And so for me, that's what gets me jazzed, is just the reach that we have to get people thinking in a different way. And then you think about like the domino effect of, if somebody gets a break, right? I think all of us want to do meaningful work with good people. Simple as that. I mean, I think that's why we show up every single day. And, unfortunately, COVID changed the dynamic of those meaningful interactions. Even sometimes the meaningful work can feel less meaningful when it's all digitized and we all sit behind a screen. For me, that kind of ripping the Band-Aid off of that for folks and giving them this new opportunity to be injected with energy, a sense of purpose, a sense of buy-in and commitment to the organization, that for me is just unparalleled, and that's what gets me excited. So, I hold a number of different things kind of true at the same time, being that I've sat in the client's shoes. So I want this to be a great participant experience, but I'm equally invested in this being a great experience for those folks that are choosing to run the hackathon, for the executives that are choosing to sponsor the hackathon, the subject matter experts that are giving of their time and their talent to help be the supporting cast. This is an ecosystem, right? We can't do this unless everybody plays their part. And so for me, it's about making sure that everybody has, the very best experience in the role that they're playing, so that this isn't a one and done. There's nothing worse than a one and done. Kind of like there's nothing worse than asking for ideas and then doing nothing with them. You're actually better off not asking. You risk incredible levels of disengagement if you do that. Same thing if you run an event like this and then it falters. It's like, oh yeah, well, we did that 2 years ago and nothing ever came of it. I want something to come of it. It doesn't matter if it's another hackathon or if it's, that's what ignites, the building of a full-blown innovation program, or more of a digitized suggestion box, or a formalized process maybe that HR follows. I want something to come of it that's bigger and beyond what we are doing in the moment. So that's what gets me super jazzed about participating in hackathons in the seat that I get to sit in.
You just reminded me on the topic of work buddies that you guys recently had some fun together. So,
We're not done yet, Matt. We're not done yet. Matt and I had the opportunity 2 Fridays ago to ride a day of RAGBRAI, which is the Register's annual Great Bike Ride across Iowa. It's the largest, longest running. There's another adjective in there too. Bike ride, organized ride. And so Matt and I spent like 102 miles in the saddle together. So I'm still trying to take back a vacation day. I think that was team building. That we talked shop at times and then we couldn't breathe at times. It was lovely. And then we're actually going to see each other next week, coming back out to the Midwest and doing a race next weekend that we'll both be at together. So yeah, not just coworkers, not just hackathon buddies, but real life friends as well.
The team that rides together.
Stays something, yes.
Stays together.
Yes.
Builds, innovates together.
Yes.
Well, I love your guys' stories of the cycling because there's always two aspects of it. There's like the struggle, which you guys are not afraid of pain and kind of putting in the work and grinding it out. But there's also the good times. And you have to. We'll find that picture you sent about what's the house, the Gothic house or something.
Yeah, we got to see the American Gothic house, so that inspired the pitchfork painting.
Yeah, that was so Grant Wood, an Iowa artist who did American Gothic, and that it really was in front of this small house. I didn't even know if it was a real house or not. And then I think maybe another thing about the spirit of Brightidea employees is that house was not on the route, but when Veronika and I were in one of the small towns, realized that it's 1 or 2 miles off the path. And so we're like, yeah, that it's totally worth it to just go see that, right? So
a 1 or 2 mile excursion.
We're already riding 100. What's another 1 or 2?
What's 2 to 4 more miles when you're doing 100 in a day?
You've revealed more about your characters than you know with that story. Yeah. Well, awesome. That's great, and it is awesome that you guys can get together. And yes, PTO credited.
I'll make sure to change that after this.
There we go. Just have to force his hand on a podcast.
Is RAGBRAI the whole state of Iowa?
It is. So it starts on the Missouri River and it ends on the Mississippi. This was the 51st year. No 2 routes have ever been the same. So it has covered, I think 20 something years in is all it took to cover all 99 counties. Occasionally you still find a town that is net new that has never hosted before. But yeah, you ride Sunday to Saturday, the last full week of July, and you cover the entire state. And you the celebration at the end is you end by dipping your front tire into the Mississippi River. That signifies the end. So.
Or your whole body.
Depends where on the Mississippi.
One thing I'll add too for Veronika and I is while the route goes west to east, more traditionally you should have more tailwind, right, from weather moving west to east. But the day we were we had at least 85 miles of headwind. The wind was directly from the east, and there was only a small part of our path that made a loop that we actually got tailwind for part of it.
My goodness.
Gluttons for punishment.
And still wanted to do an extra mile or 2.
That extra mile or 2 was only about 20 miles in. So at that point,
if that would have been around mile 90, maybe we would have had to let Grant Wood rest in peace.
Tail end of it, I didn't need to see a house.
Well, that reminds me of how some of our projects go, where we're going down and we're like, oh, there's just this side excursion of 2 miles off to the side that we have to do before we can get back on the track we're on prior.
I thought you were going to say projects where you're like, there's an 85 mile per hour headwind.
Oh, that too.
Right now.
That too. Plenty of that. All right. Well, thank you both for joining, and thank you both for all the wonderful things that you do. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being part of the Synthesized Pod, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great being here.
So what do you think, Margaret?
Yeah, really fun conversation. I think that the two of them have such a wealth of expertise and knowledge, and then also were able to help me think about that, like holding creativity in a space in a new way, of that kind of convergence of constraints that offer you these moments of being able to get out into this big creative world, but then forcing back into some lanes and then going back out again. And I love the visual of that process that was in my head.
So I didn't even think about it until we were like in the middle of the show, but they really, kind of cover these two aspects of it. Veronika very much, working in the trenches, like whatever thing blows up that day. And then Matt trying to take a big step back and like look at these, discrete phases and whatnot. And you've been developing this theme the whole time, and I didn't see it before we started, but yeah, this like how much work it is to create space for creativity. And I think what was net new today was like that maybe that's actually getting worse. Like common sense thing would be like, oh, we have more time, we have all this automation, we have all this technology, but maybe with all the optimization stuff, we've actually, there's actually less time, and you actually have to work harder to create those spaces for people.
Yeah, I definitely anecdotally see that that's the case, is that it feels, even though that we can have access to work materials from our computer to our phone, that we carry it around with us. It's not like, back in the day where you could maybe take a manila envelope home with some memos that we needed to review. I was never in a job like that, but I can't take credit for that. But it does feel like we're not having these clear boundaries with work and life, and that to set aside a hackathon to create that boundary of, now we're not going to do the routine day to day. You don't have to check your Slack. You don't have to check your email. You don't have to be responsible for your normal maybe customer communications, and you have this space and place to play. But that's really difficult because I'm sure those folks are bringing their phones and working on their computers to do the hackathon stuff. So to be undistractable, and I love that book. I think it is called Undistractable. There's also like Radical Focus and some other ones, but it's really, really getting harder to be undistracted in a work context. And I think that's why so much process is required to create this space for creativity.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation about that yesterday where, if you have a work from home setup, you can do your work and then maybe eat dinner, and then you're like, oh, I can sit down at my computer, and then your Slack or your Teams starts popping up, and you just get pulled in, and another 2 hours disappears. And it's crazy because you need your phone to like log into all these things. You like have to have it with you. It's like a requirement, right? Like, oh, you can't even get into things without your phone. But then everything on your phone is, you've got like these wizards of addiction and engagement, like just trying to suck you in. So I know one time I was, just in the past few days, I was trying to go on Twitter to go get some link, and then I got like pulled into some Twitter hole, because it's just people just trying to suck you into those holes. So yeah, I love that. I like that concept a lot of undistractable, and that being like a aspirational character trait, right? That being a virtue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, another great episode in the can, and we got a few more customer stories coming. So looking forward to the next one with you.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Synthesize Pod. For more resources on how to bring innovation to the forefront of your organization, sign up for our newsletter at brightidea.com. That's brightidea.com. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.